to the advocacy center. Had a hard time with that one. They go to the advocacy center and they talk with them and they're just not feeling it, or they're not outcrying and they're not doing all of these things. What can we do without them? So we built all of our prior investigative stuff. We built out our OSINT. We have our search warrants sent to Facebook now. We've got our digital media. We've got all of these wonderful things. We just have to really, really stop and slow down and consider a few things with that victim, even in the advocacy environment, or the environment with the victim service providers. One of the main ones is they're probably not going to identify as victims. We all know that. We see that in probably 95% of the young ladies and men that we deal with. And most of them will tell you that, hey, well, I did this. Like, this is what I did. I chose to do this. It's almost empowering to me because I'm in control, when reality is they're not. Lying and giving rehearsed stories. I like this one when it comes to the cops in the room. So I've asked, why did you arrest this person? Well, they lied to me. Okay, Pope Benedict. Has anybody ever lied to you in your entire career? Or is this the first person, right? Well, I don't do well with being lied to. Well, congratulations. We know that the stories they give, it's going to be a lie oftentimes, right? It's just what it is. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. Stories change over time. What do we do when we think about minor sexual abuse? We say, okay, kid's going to come in, kid's going to give a story. The story's going to change over time, right? Because of trauma. It's that little Rolodex that's going on and it's filing. Trauma. Oh, let's go like this, let's stop, let's do all these things, and we say this is traumatic. It's trauma that's caused that. But holy Jesus, if you're 18 years old in one day and there's a $100 bill in there and your story changes for one moment, now all of a sudden you are the most egregious form of prostitute there ever was, and you must go to jail because we have to rid the world of you, right? We need to stop and think and apply those same concepts to both that we use with our minor sex abuse victims that we would with our sex trafficking victims, and both minor and adult. They're going to be behaviorally dependent on traffickers. We see that all the time. Like when the phone goes off and it says daddy, that's who that is. That behavior is always going to be dependent on that. It's always going to be dependent on, we all know about Stockholm Syndrome, right? We all know how that is. That's like Police Academy Day 4, and I'm sure for everybody that's involved in advocacy, I said it right that time, like you guys know that. One of the ones, especially for the cops and the prosecutors, that I would encourage you to really read up on is learned helplessness and the theory of learned helplessness. And just to give a very brief overview, there was some very well-paid doctor, I'm sure in like the 1950s, who said, oh, I'm going to do this test and we'll see what happens. So the short version is he took a kennel that had dogs, and the ground in that kennel was electrified. And they would sound off a siren and go brrr, and then they go coo, and they'd start cooking the floor, right? So now the dog's getting shocked. So what happens when that happens? You like freak out, right? Like, you gotta get away from this. So this continued. And then what would happen with the dog? Brrr, alarm would go off, dog would lay down. This is where I'm at. I know what's about to happen. Embrace it. Dog gets shocked. Then they would take dogs and put them in one that they could climb over or get away from the shocked area to the non-shocked area, right? So they're like, we've now provided this escape. Alarm goes off, dog's in the shocked side. What does dog do? Lays down. I know what this is. You could get away, right? We see that all the time. You walked in the hotel without him. You could have just said, hey, I need help, right? But that's what it is, and that's how it really, that's the short version, the dumbed down cop version of how it transpires. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it happens. Does anybody in here want their family to know all of the bad things that they've been involved in? We used to have a polygraph examiner when I worked death scenes and sex crimes, and he would get the polygraph person, the person subject to the polygraph, and then they do the preliminary questions. Are you gonna do this? Have you ever done that? Blah, 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 let's work. And he always said, have you ever done anything sexually that would embarrass your family? And I'm like, there is no way I would take this guy's polygraph test, ever in a million years. Because that word alone, you know what I mean? I'm just not talking to grandma about this. So we really have to remember that when we do go, as an example, through cell phones and we find all this pornography that's been made, we do hear that all the time. We're like, hey, he threatened to send this stuff to my mom if I did anything, you know, all these things. I don't know. I don't want my mom seeing that stuff. So it is something that's oftentimes used. So I like this one a lot. We have to consider that their current situation may be better than where they came from. And going back to the law enforcement lens, or even the advocacy lens, or the lens of the VSPs, it's easy for us to say, this is bad. Like, you don't need to be here. Let's take you out of this. And then we have to consider where they're going back to. And what is that environment? And I don't know if y'all know this, but a lot of these kids are coming through the foster care system. And a lot of these kids are being sexually abused in the foster care system. So then we're gonna take you and we're gonna put you right back into the very system that failed you the first time. And to them, think about it like this. If Uncle Jimmy comes in, he likes to say Uncle Touchy. I like Uncle Jimmy. There's no Jimmy in here, is there? Okay, good. Uncle Jimmy comes in and you don't get the choice of what's going on, but now all of a sudden you feel the sense of empowerment because you can say, well, I made $100 for it out on the street. We have to remember that to them, that is a logical decision that they're making, and it may actually be worse at home what's going on. Knowing your rights. I love this whole knowing your rights thing. Has anybody ever been told, no, I know my rights? Right? That's usually the quickest way to get jerked out of the window of your car, at least in our jurisdiction. I know my rights, you're not talking to me. We hear that all the time. We hear like, you have to Mirandize me. Actually, you're a victim of crime. I'm not going to Mirandize you. So they may not know what they're entitled to. What if you have a foreign national? What if you have somebody that really genuinely doesn't know their rights? And it's easy to forget as Americans, we have these rights. I have the right to do all of these things, right? I have a right to not wear a mask. No, I'm just kidding. I have a right to everything. When we were working operations in Mongolia, for instance, trafficker shows up to the door and the cop who's standing there in a nice suit says, hi. And the guy goes, well, who the hell are you? Obviously translated. And he goes, well, we're the cops. And they said, give me your phone. Does that guy have a right to say, no, you can't do anything with my phone? Not there. So then they say, what's the password? And he goes, well, this is what it is. Does he have a right to say, get a search warrant? Nope. They then proceeded, which I wish we could do to the traffickers, to beat the guy. And it was amazing. But if you were to take that same person and put him here, or his same victims and put them here, all they know is what they know and what they've grown up with and where they've been. So if we have somebody coming from Guatemala, as an example, and that person's trafficked in some labor venue, are the cops in Guatemala the same as the cops here? If I'm the Guatemalan man and I say, hey, look, man, you can't trust the guy with the tan shirts and the badges because those are the ones that we pay. Does that happen in Guatemala? It does. Yeah, they're paying the cops. So I'm not going to trust that guy because you told me and we come from the same place. So we really have to remember that people are oftentimes not even aware of what they actually have rights for. Blaming themselves, we see that a lot. Like, I'm the one that did this. I'm the one that was stupid. I'm the one that fell for this. I'm the one that chose this. I did all of these things. That is literally what the traffickers are banking on, is that person to feel that way. And then again, just having the loyalty. So I want to talk about some victim interview considerations, especially on the adult side. 18 is legal here, right? Or 17? 18. So at 17 and 364 days, you were treated as what? A juvenile, right? So we'll say, oh, we're a juvenile. We're going to take you to the advocacy center, and we're going to do our forensic interviews, and we're going to do all these wonderful things that are set in place for you. 2 days later, however, you're now a grown adult who makes all these competent decisions, and you should be able to just do all these things. So we have to remember that our interviews really need to be dictated by our survivors. And while we're doing the advocacy center interviews on juveniles, if you have an advocacy center that's willing to do it on a 19-year-old, is there anything that says we can't do that? Is there anybody for 1 minute that thinks, I would make a better interviewer for a drug-addicted 19-year-old victim of human trafficking than she would? Probably not. A little easier to talk to her than it is me. I'm going to sit here and be like, tell me, all of these things. I'm going to grill you because that's what we do. So we really wanted to even consider working with our advocacy centers if we can get an adult room. If we have NGOs that will offer up a room that will be like, hey, look, have a couch. We have one that has like a couple chairs. It's real laid back, just like at the center, but it's more of what we use for our adults. And here's the other glorious thing about it. When we were doing interviews for homicide suspects, where did we do them at? Police department, right? We would take you back to our sheriff's office, and you were either seated in interview room number 1 or number 2. And interview room number 1 and number 2 was boring. It was small. It had the nice little walls that have soundproof stuff or whatever it is. You had a table, a chair that rolls, and a chair that don't roll. Who gets the chair that don't roll? He does, or she does. Who gets the chair that rolls? And in my case, lifts up a little bit so I can get a little taller. Right? That's set up for that. So when we encounter a 19-year-old trafficking victim, where are we taking them to do interviews? Same place. And we're sitting them in a place that is designed to be uncomfortable for you. And we're doing this. So just something to think about. Let's get them in places that are a little softer and more easygoing. Preparing questions prior to interviews. This seems like police 101. If we've done all of our intel, we should be able to walk in knowing all the answers to all the questions, right? If we know that you were in Albuquerque and you were here and you were there and this is when and this is everything we've done, we should already be prepared to answer or to ask certain questions. When we get to like note taking and stuff like that, I don't know what it is with cops. We will sit in a room that is being recorded with audio and video and be like, so tell me what happened. And they're talking, and we're not providing any visual feedback. And we're writing all this down so that we can review it, right? Can we review our audio and video and just be like, it's the same thing. So let's take time to engage and time to actually do our interviews. Informal conversation, that's a big one. I can't walk in, let's be real, with a 20-year-old and be like, so during the course of the vaginal intercourse whilst, whatever. We have to mirror what they're saying. I'm not saying get in there and get vulgar. That is the number one thing I would absolutely say don't do. But if they're saying but, don't say hiney. You know what I'm saying? We have to really mirror and mimic some of that conversation. That's obviously what the forensic interviewers know. I've seen some amazing forensic interviews where kids just say something completely off the wall where I'm like, and the interviewer's like, oh, he what? So just something to think about. I'm gonna let Jason talk on the neuropathology because I'm not the neuropathology guy. I don't know if y'all have noticed that. So at this point, we're gonna tag team back and forth quite a bit.
I'm not the neuropathology either. I mean, I've got one slide on it, but if you don't understand neuropathology of trauma, it's worth just talking about if you're going to learn how to interact with and speak to your victims. And if you ever have the opportunity to go to some like legitimate neuropathology of trauma training, it is so worth it. I had the opportunity to go to a bunch when we got started with this, and then I got the opportunity to work a couple cases and use it, and it was a game changer. So, neuropathology is just that trauma, particularly complex trauma, which is what trafficking or child sexual abuse is going to be, right? It's not a car wreck. This is not something that happened just once. This is a car wreck that happens 20 times a night, every day of the week, for years. So it's a complex trauma. Well, what that does is it affects our basic brain function. And now I always love doing this, but you've got the different parts of your brain. And down there in the center on your brain stem, you've got two little offshoots that come off, and that's your amygdala. It takes me a minute to, did I say that right? Did I screw it up? Amygdala. And they say it's your reptilian brain. And so if you want to figure out where that is in your brain, you take your thumb and you wrap it over and you close your fist, and there it is all buried inside your brain stem. But your amygdala controls a lot of bodily functions, and it controls recall. It can affect recall, and it's basically what causes your fight or flight. It's your basic animalistic responses. And that's something that somebody who goes through trauma deals with. Now think about, this is a core subject, right? But think about, if you got raped, think about what your body would do. It would fight or flight, and the offense would happen, and it would get done. But then imagine if you got raped again, and 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 it kept happening and kept happening. Your brain would learn how to deal with that so that it could deal with the trauma without it being so traumatic, like learned helplessness, like Joe talked about. So it's literally a chemical response in your brain. Well, the problem with that is that changes the way that we recall. Complex trauma changes the way that we recall. For those of you that aren't in law enforcement, most police departments now have policies that if an officer is involved in a shooting, that the department, internal affairs, and then whatever agency is going to investigate the shooting is not allowed to talk to that person, usually for 2 days, so that they can have enough sleep cycles so that their brain can process and function, and so that they can recall. Now, do we give that to our victims? When we encounter them? No. I mean, I need to know what's going on right now. Well, so the problem with that is this complex trauma, because of the neuropathology of trauma, it causes us to recall differently. And where that runs into a big problem, especially for law enforcement, but really anybody, is, I've been a cop 21 years. I feel pretty confident that I've become a human lie detector. I can call BS in a heartbeat because I've heard it all. Because what that means is that I'm good at picking up deception, okay? So just like a polygrapher, the machine picks up deception, people can pick up deception. And why do we pick up deception? Let's go back to this morning. Because of our biases, right? So our biases lead us to say, if a person can't remember, or if they can't remember in a certain way, or if they don't remember the way that I think that they should remember if I went through this, which I've never been through, then it's deception. And so a lot of times, complex trauma, because of the neuropathology of trauma, looks like deception. And so we have to find ways to interrupt that mechanism in the brain when we talk to our victims. So, one easy way that I've heard a lot of people use, I haven't tried it yet, but I've heard a lot of people use it, I've heard interviewers use it and counselors use it, is use some sort of stimuli that's going to snap that person to say, whoa. Because think about it, like, you ever been in a day-long training for your continuing ed and you're just tired of it and you kind of like, and then, somebody may come along and walk right up to you and say, oh, are you TikToking? And they snap you out of it. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm paying attention now, Well, you can use a stimuli like that in an interview with the victim. And there's nothing wrong or unethical about just keeping a bowl of mints, right? Or some Sour Patch Kids or lemonade or something that's just going to stimulate their brain to say, hey, we're working now. This isn't trauma. We're remembering. We got to start pushing this stuff out. Okay, that can help you in your interview. Another thing, too, is don't take control away from the victim, because all you're going to do is initiate that traumatic response in their brain. Because that's what the abuser did. That's what the trafficker has done. Think about what we do as cops, right? You go to the bathroom. When I say you go to the bathroom, you can I use my phone? No, you can't use your phone. You're here talking to me. I want you, like Joe said, I want you to sit in this chair. I want you to face this wall. You're going to eat when I say eat. You're going to do all these things. That's exactly what the trafficker's done to him. So all you've done is just taken over the position of a trafficker, taken the control away from them, and you're going to initiate that traumatic response in their brain, and they're just going to stop, and they're not going to give you the information that you need. So allow your victims to have control when you're speaking to them. And unfortunately, and this drives, I've learned to deal with it, but it drives cops nuts, is that I don't want to sit here for 4 hours and talk to you, but you're going to have to sit there for 4 hours and talk to somebody. You're going to say, look, we're going to have this conversation on your terms. I'm going to try and guide you. There's certain things that I'm going to need to know. I'm going to have to ask some questions that you don't really like, but this is on you. So if you've got to make a phone call, if you've got to get up, go to the bathroom, if you want something to eat, let me know. We'll do that. It's not a big deal. And sometimes that means we're going to have to come back tomorrow. So other techniques that you can use. All right, this is like basic management, basic psychology. I hope that everybody's got some familiarity with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Is this new stuff for folks? If it is, I can go more in depth with it. But Maslow's hierarchy of needs is basically that we have different needs that need to be fulfilled, and the most basic needs need to be fulfilled before we can get to that next need. So Maslow describes the hierarchy of needs as a pyramid, and I should have put it in here as a pyramid. But at the bottom of the pyramid are your hygiene needs, your basic needs, right? Your physiological needs. You need food, you need rest, you need just the basic building blocks. And you can't put anything on top of that foundation until you get it, okay? So as we go up, think about a pyramid. And then on top of your physiological needs are your safety needs. And so safety, what does this look like, for a victim? It's going to be your comfort need, but it's also going to be, where am I sleeping tonight, right? When I leave here with you, where am I going to go? Am I going to go to juvenile? Am I going to go to jail? Am I going to go to an RTC? Am I going to go to a CPS office? Am I going to go to some weird foster family that I've never met? That's got to be met before I can get the next step up the pyramid. So we talk about, to backtrack, we use Unbound a lot, and honestly, those advocates are the best because I can call them and be like, I don't know when this girl's eaten. I can't expect her to tell me anything if she's hungry. And so they'll bring food. And the last girl I interviewed, she didn't eat any of it, and it was driving me crazy because I hadn't even showered that morning. I was going to work out, and I wanted to eat. And I looked at that chicken biscuit for 4 hours, going, just eat it. But anyway, so that's stuff, you have to fulfill that need before you can get to the next one. And you have to fulfill the safety need before you get to the next one. And then on top of that is going to be belonging. Belonging is an important need. What's their relationship with you? I worked a case one time that was a very successful outcome, but part of the reason why it was successful is the victim, when she came in to talk with me, she trusted me from the get-go. You know why she trusted me from the get-go? Because she'd been raped before, and because it was actually one of Joe's old partners that worked the case, but he treated her really well. Now, I didn't know anything about that. She didn't know anything about that we weren't connected. But he treated her really well. So that law enforcement officer treated her really well. So when she came in to talk to me, she expected that I was going to treat her really well. And so that helped. But sometimes that's going to be a bridge that you're going to have to build. And a lot of times, especially with these kids that are chronic victims of abuse, kids that have been in chronic placement, you're going to have to do a lot of bridge building with this, because they have heard every stinking lie that every well-meaning adult and every advocate and every CPS worker can tell them, okay? And if there's anything that you can do to build that relationship is be honest. And even if the answer sucks, be honest about it. Some of the best interviews I've had with teenage kids have been the ones where I'll say, look, what are you worried about? What would you like to happen tonight, tomorrow, next week, and next year? Let's talk about that. And a lot of times they'll come to me and they'll say, I want to go stay with my aunt in North Texas. Okay, I don't know if we can do that. I don't even know if that's a possibility, but I'll find out. I can talk to CPS and I can find out why. Can we put you with your aunt? If I need their help with transportation there, I can try it. And sometimes we've had that happen. And then I've had other times when I've called CPS and they're like, no, Aunt is married to Uncle Touchy. She's not going there, But that's an issue that before you get to the meat and potatoes of your trafficking investigation, you're going to have to address with this kid, like, what's our relationship going to be like? Are you going to give me a bunch of baloney? Should I even bother trusting you from the beginning? Next on top of that is going to be your esteem needs. It's going to be your self-worth and your personal value. Okay, so that's going to be when this person says, I am empowered enough that I can talk to them. I'm empowered enough that I don't have to experience those symptoms of secrecy, helplessness, entrapment, accommodation, delayed unconvincing disclosure, and retraction or recantation, right? It's going to be that worth. You liked that, didn't you? MCJ. Anyway, you're going to have to deal with that. You're going to have to get this person to that level to where they can say, okay, where am I at? I'm fed. I have an idea of where I'm going to spend the night. This dude's cool. And I'm not so bad myself. Which means you're going to have to take away the stigma of like, hey, usually the way I address this is, so I work crimes against children. And I want you to understand what that means. Unless you come in and you tell me where the Lindbergh baby is or that you were involved in a murder last night, I really don't care, okay? I don't care that you sold dope. I don't care that you stole a car. And I know that's a tough sell for as a cop to go in and go, I don't care about these crimes. Now, do I care? Of course I care. But if I look at you as a victim, I'm going to care about how you ended up in that situation as a child and how that worked out. But I'm going to tell them, look, what I work are crimes committed against children. And right now, that's you, okay? And you're a victim. And so I want to do what's right for you. Give that person some worth. It is not until you address all of those needs that you can get to the tip of the pyramid and get to the self-actualization needs. Now, from a management perspective, self-actualization is what what like John Maxwell and all these management authors talk about. Okay, it's like we want to get our employees to be self-actualized so that they can do, the best possible efficient job that they can do. Well, this is true, right? You're the center director, right? We want everybody to be self-actualized. I don't want to have to tell you to go out and do a good job, Grace. I want you to go out and do a good job because you're just a good job doer. Well, think about what we're asking of our victims with self-actualization. We've got to be convinced that they're a victim, but so do they. And I can't have them identify as a victim. Think about how it almost feels obnoxious to say it. Think about if you're in a position of a trafficking victim, if you have had to account for your ramen noodles, you do your laundry when he says so, you stay where this person says, and you have sex with strangers. Think how entitled you would have to feel to say, dang it, I'm a victim. You, Mr. Policeman, Mr. Advocate, Mr. Attorney, you should be helping me because I got screwed because I've been a slave for all this time. Think about the empowerment that needs. You cannot sit a kid or a person down and in the first 10 minutes of your interview, get them there until you address these other things, okay? So it takes time. It takes time. It takes just being a decent human being, recognizing that person in front of you is a person. And that's just, you got to start there. You got to start at the beginning if you want to get to the end. Okay, so what are some techniques that you can use? One of the things, I learned this in a training. I wish I remembered where I learned it so I could give the person credit, but I learned it in a training and this is not my own. And I've done this with so many people, is I use this notebook. Just a little legal pad, not the full-size ones. But we'll go through, and I'll do this hours-long interview with somebody. I do scribble notes. I'm not like taking a dictation, but I do scribble notes. But I'm writing stuff down. There's not, even the kids know that we're recording the interviews. I mean, I love you bring the 6-year-old in, and no matter how well you hide it, the first thing I want to see is the camera. So everybody knows that you're recording, you're a cop, you're recording that interview. What is it? What happens to people who lie to the police? They what? They get in trouble. Is lying to the police a crime in Alabama? Depends. Does it depend on what? If I come to you when I leave here and I say, Joe Scaramucci stole my car, and you find out that I didn't even have a car and Joe didn't steal it, what's going to happen to me? False report? Yeah. I mean, people, it's fair assumption. It's definitely a federal crime. It's a crime in Texas, kind of the same deal. People can go to jail for saying BS to the police. So that's something that's going to be on a victim's mind, and we've talked about complex trauma and how that affects recall, and so that's something we've got to think about. So what I'll do is I'll sit down at the end of the interview, and I will hand them this notebook, and I will say, hey, when I go to the doctor for my physical, I have all these questions in my head that I want to ask them, and then I usually get out of the appointment, and I'm walking to my car, and I go, oh man, forgot to ask that thing, and now I can't, and so I go home. What I want you to do is, we've talked about a lot of stuff here today. When you leave here, I want you to take this notebook, and when you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning tomorrow from a dead sleep and you go, oh man, I forgot to tell Lundquist this thing, I want you to write it down. And then when we come back together again sometime, when we have to talk again, you're going to have this notebook filled with all these things that you remembered, and then you can tell them to me then. Just bring the notebook. Now, I'll tell you, I've never once had a victim bring the notebook back. But what am I doing with that notebook? I'm giving them a physical representation that it is okay to forget, right? Or more importantly, I'm giving them something physical that says it's okay to remember later. And so we have to be aware of that, that to address that trauma, I'm not going to sit here and go through my whole slide on neuropathology with a trafficking victim. I'm just going to give them that notebook and say, hey, you might have stuff come up later. It's okay. We can talk about it. I'm not going to arrest you. Another thing too is like, what happens What happens, let's talk about adult victims, but we can talk about kids too. What happens to adult victims of sexual assault that aren't believed? So they almost come to where they think that they're lying. Yeah, and kind of, if you listen to Anatomy of a Doubt, that comes up, where you get that recantation. But are there ramifications to somebody who's not believed? If you have the courage to report a sexual assault or trafficking or child abuse, and somebody says, I don't believe you, there's not going to be a prosecution, there's not going to be an arrest. You may or may not get out of that situation, but what are some of the long-term implications? Are there civil implications of that? Do y'all have slander and libel laws here? Yeah? Civil law, yeah. You can be sued. You can be sued if you're not believed. If somebody says, well, you're a liar now. So you can be labeled a liar. And it's not whether you lied, it's whether or not you were believed. And you can be civilly sued. So that's stuff we have to think about. We have to encourage people that they can, that's not going to happen unless it's truly a lie. And you better be damn sure of that if you say that. But this influences disclosure. And so we have to be aware of that, and we have to think about that when we talk to our victims. You want to do this?
Favorite.
It's a good time.
It's a good time. So has anybody in here, and I have to ask because it bit me hard one time, does anybody in here have a family member or somebody that you have loved die from choking on either a hamburger or a hot dog? Nobody. Okay. You do? Okay. Gotcha. We went through this whole thing about a hot dog, and I said, but that's not traumatic. And she said, well, my granddad actually died from choking on a hot dog. And I went, oh, okay, yeah, okay. And she goes, no, I'm serious. And I was like, oh, now I feel stupid. So since we've passed that, can I have one volunteer that wants to answer questions about hamburgers or hot dogs? So hop on up then. Is there anything traumatic to you about eating a hamburger or a hot dog? Okay. So what do you like better, hamburgers or hot dogs? So Sheila, I'll tell you what, can you take the mic and we'll back and forth?
Yeah.
So you like hamburgers better. I speak a little loud. Why do you like hamburgers better than hot dogs?
Hold on. We want everybody to hear your answers. Hold on. So we're at she said hamburgers? Okay, she said hamburgers.
I like hamburgers because they generally come from a specific kind of meat instead of an amalgamation of meats. The texture's better too.
That's definitely a good reason to like hamburgers better.
They have better condiments, but you can put those on hot dogs too, but they still taste better on a hamburger.
So when was the first time you decided I like hamburgers better than hot dogs?
Today.
You never before considered that hamburgers were better than hot dogs?
No, I was lying. I've always liked hamburgers better.
Okay, so you just lied. You liked hamburgers better. When roughly was the first time you thought to myself, you sat there and you said, I like hamburgers better than hot dogs?
The first time I had a hot dog.
When was that?
As a child.
Do you remember how old you were?
Younger than 10.
Okay, so younger than 10 at some point you tried a hot dog and you're like, oh, this is gross.
Yeah.
What do you like on your hamburgers? Do you like cheese?
Yes.
What kind of cheese do you like?
Pepper jack.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about. When did you decide, I like pepper jack cheese more than any other cheese on my hamburger?
When I learned that pepper jack cheese existed.
Do you remember when that was?
Not a clue.
Any ballpark idea?
16.
16, okay. What else do you like on hamburgers? Do you like ketchup, mustard, or mayonnaise?
Definitely not mayonnaise. Ketchup, I could take it or leave it. Mustard's good. Pickles are good.
So
lettuce,
mustard.
tomatoes, onions.
When did you decide that mayonnaise was not good for hamburgers?
I decided that mayonnaise wasn't good at all when I watched my mom take a bite of one on a hamburger and the white stuff just squirted on the sides of her mouth. It's disgusting. No one should ever have to see that.
Agreed. Okay, mayonnaise is out.
Yeah, I did that on purpose.
You like pickles? A little awkward there.
Proceed.
You like pickles on your burger, you said, right?
I like pickles.
Okay.
I like pickles.
When did you first decide pickles were better on the burger than no pickles?
I would have to say the first time that someone forgot to put pickles on it. And I think that I like the circle pickles better than the long pickles because otherwise you just pull it off and it gets all sloppy and on your face, and I don't like that.
Do you remember when the first time that was?
Let's say 10.
10. Okay, cool. So there's nothing traumatic about eating hamburgers. You never choked on a hamburger, the most traumatic thing you described. I could agree with that. But aside from that, you cannot give me any timeline as to whether or not something that is completely insignificant mattered. You can't even tell me, hey, look, when I was 16 on my 16th birthday, at lunch I had a hamburger and I had pickles, and that's when I thought this is the best thing I've ever had in my entire life. My world is complete. I can die happy now.
Nope.
No. So no trauma at all. Let's take all of that and throw in complex trauma. Should you be able to recall any of that?
No.
No. So we have people show up, we want to do interviews, we take them to the advocacy center, we take them to our other adjoining room where we have advocates there, and we're like, hey, we want to talk to you, and you tell us all these things. We expect them to tell us when the first time they decided hamburgers were better than hot dogs, right? And we expect that story to be linear. And, oh, well, I did decide, at 12 years old in 3 days that hamburgers were actually better than hot dogs. And then I decided after that, because I threw some pickles on there, and one was circular, one was a spear, and I thought, ooh, I like circular better. We can't do that, right? It's not going to happen. So that breakup is happening the exact same way. It's just manifesting differently. So if you look, I gave everybody a note card, right? On that note card, I would like for everybody, do not write your name. I repeat, do not write your name. Write down the most traumatic thing that has ever happened to you in your entire life, unless it's going to create a triggering mechanism for you. If not, feel free not to participate. But the most traumatic thing that's ever happened in your life, write it down and fold it up. We're going to collect them, and then we're going to bring them to the front, and we're going to read them all out loud. I'll give you 5 minutes to think on it.
There's so many things. I was like trying to decide. I'm so traumatized. It's just me because I'm neurotic. Like everything was a trauma. It wasn't just silly, but it's pretty dramatic.
So first off, I'm not gonna lie, the little rustling, I thought it was thunder earlier. I was sitting here thinking, oh my God, oh, is it? It just did it again. I was like, oh, never mind. I'm not losing my mind. Okay, so we're gonna read through these. I'll be honest with you. The first time I did it, or the only time I ever did it, I wrote that the most traumatic thing that happened to me was when I was 16, I got arrested for some things. That really wasn't traumatic. It was obviously not good, but it was a juvenile offense and it went away, so here I am, good to go. But that's hard for people to do. So we're gonna read through these. I did have at the conference on crimes against women a couple of years ago, somebody wrote, I swear to God, it was one of two women that were in the room. They put on there, I beat my spouse in the back of the head with firewood. And I was like, that took some gumption. I'm not gonna lie, I'm proud of you. But whatever. So we've got, at age 8, I almost drowned in a pool. P.S. I still cannot swim. Grew up with an alcoholic father, domestic violence between he and my mom, so my childhood to about age 11 was traumatic overall. After they divorced, he came to the house and was there all night. They fought. He called my mom names. He spit in her face. Ended up with her busting his head open with a baseball bat. Thrown out of the house by father at age 8.5, sexually abused at age 15. Observing the death of my youngest brother at the age of 32. A huge dog jumping on me. I feel that, whoever that, do not do dogs. When I discovered that my boyfriend was cheating with my best friend. OSINT. I had 2 friends murdered. The murderer was their son. I watched him grow up. He committed the murder in front of his very young stepbrother and sister. My father disowned me. Bike wreck that ripped almost half my face off. I was a teenager when it happened. I drowned in a pool when I was 2 years old, 12 times resuscitation, and flown to Birmingham. Death of friends and family members. Death of my brother. The death of my dad when I was 10 years old. The death of my mom when I was 20 years old. Domestic violence. Flying to Hawaii on an Air Force plane and the plane almost broke, C-130. The plane almost broke down and we had to land quickly. I thought we were going to die. C-130 is leaking oil the whole flight. Anyway. At around 8 years old, I was playing in a cotton trailer when the cotton picker dumped all the cotton in the trailer. Fortunately, my face was pinned against the wire so I could breathe enough to survive until I got dug out by adults. Okay, that's that. Received 1st and 2nd degree burns from coffee. Somebody made an airplane. I like you. My youngest son died in my arms. I watched his eyes dry out and blood could, that one we're not going to keep reading. Childhood neglect by my mom. Having an abortion. Being thrown into a pool trying to learn how to survive, or swim, I'm sorry. Ruptured brain, aneurysm, 30 days in ICU. Parents stole identity, ruined my credit, and my sister believed them when they denied it. Saw mom rolled over on by a horse, broke everything waist down. Having a spider on me. Grandparents' divorce. Watched a dorm blow up by a suicide bomber that I lived in 2 weeks prior. My sister was in a car wreck and almost died. I was 10 years old. And father passed away when I was a teenager. Okay, so you guys are actually much more open than the overwhelming majority of people. And I want to point something out. There's obviously a lack of sympathy or empathy, I guess, in my tone. I'm just reading this, right? It's not something that's traumatic to me. If I was to tell you the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to me, my tone would be much more different than if I'm just reading something off a piece of paper, right? I mean, that's just human nature. Not that clearly I don't feel bad for any of these. I intentionally did that. And the reason for that is when we sit down with these survivors and we talk to them, and I'm just telling you, tell me all about this, explain this to me, blah, 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 blah. We give the impression that it's insignificant, right? It's insignificant to me. I'm just the cop who's here taking notes. We have to remember that a little empathy can go a long way. So when we show up at a hotel room and we go to the adjoining room and we talk to outreach, or we leave outreach and we go talk to the advocacy center, or we do all of those things, what are we asking them to do? To share horrific things, right? We're saying, please share horrific things with me. And I'm here to help you if you do this. And we're expecting these people to share these horrific things and do it in a way that goes back to hamburgers and hot dogs. It's gotta be traumatic and it has to be linear. Because if it's not linear, it's what? It's a lie. What you're saying doesn't make sense. And although the MDT model is great for many things, let's think about this and let's be realistic about it, at least in the state of Texas, and I believe pretty much everywhere. But let's say we have an adult, just to throw a little wrench in there. I have a 19-year-old young lady show up. I'm gonna say, tell me the most horrific thing. Pull out your note card, tell me everything, right? I wanna know. And she's gonna do it, and I'm gonna sit here and, truth be told, I'm gonna be taking my notes, and I'm gonna be really showing lack of empathy to her, and I'm gonna say, okay, here's everything I want, and she's gonna recall this story, and then we're gonna say, okay, look, now that you've done this, I really appreciate it. I've got this organization out here that wants to talk to you. They're gonna be able to provide you services. I told you I was here for you and your health. Let's go over there and talk to them. So they're gonna walk on over, and they're gonna talk to this group of, nice young ladies, and they're gonna say, hey, tell us what happened, right? We wanna help you. So what's happening now? We're doing this again. And what's probably gonna happen? It's gonna be a little bit of a story change somewhere in there, even if it's insignificant. And then we're gonna take that same person and we're gonna go where? More than likely, at least in our jurisdiction, to the hospital. When we get to the hospital, what's gonna happen? Same nurse is gonna walk in and say, hey, talk to me, tell me what's going on. And that same nurse is gonna go through all this again. And again, it's to help you, right? I mean, it legitimately is there to help you. But something's gonna happen, something's gonna change. You're gonna tell all of these things all over again for the third time in probably the last 12 hours. And then we're gonna have our case built and we're gonna find our guy, we're gonna arrest him, we're gonna put him in jail. So then what's gonna happen is we're gonna do our case report, we're gonna send it on to our wonderful district attorney's office. And the DA is gonna say, hey, this is great, I need to talk to her, right? Hey, investigator, go bring her in my office, let's sit down, let's have a conference, let's talk. And we can only imagine that she's probably not the not the best victim we would want. I mean, that's just the reality of it. It's not somebody walking in with a Harvard degree. And you're gonna be, hey, tell us this traumatic story again, because I have to prove this in court. And we're gonna do this again, and the story may change again a little bit. And then we're gonna go, and we're gonna do this in front of who? A courtroom. So one thing we can say, because I don't know if you guys know this, we're all Alabama friends now. Like, you're literally all my friends. But we can sit in here and anonymously, but probably very uncomfortably, let's be real, write these things down. Nobody jumped up and was like, hell yeah, give me a pen, bro, I'm down. We're very uncomfortable about this, but we do it, and we're doing it anonymously. So we're gonna take her, we're gonna put her in the hot seat in front of who? Strangers. We have a jury of our peers. Probably in the state of Alabama, you do juries of 12 on felonies, right? You have at least a jury of 12. We're gonna have a judge who's probably some old crotchety dude that nobody even likes anyway. We're gonna have at least how many DAs? Probably 2. 1 here? So 1 DA. We'll have a defense attorney, right? We'll have, who else? Him. And then we're gonna have, inevitably, his baby mama, his sister, his auntie, his everything, and probably a couple people of your family that are gonna sit there, and we're gonna do what? We're going to share all of this all over again. And the moment we start getting back to hamburgers and hot dogs, what's that defense attorney going to do to you? He's going to eat you alive. So it's just something we need to think about, and it's something I really want to drive home. If we can build cases without this and without making this necessary, why don't we do that? And if we can do that and say, look, you know what, let's take at least one spoke out of this, and let's just take you to somebody who can help you. And let you tell that story to the advocate. And let that advocate work with you, and you guys do this together, and I'll worry about DAs. I'll worry about judges. I'll worry about the evidence. And now me and the DA are going to work together, and we're going to finish building this out while you're over here getting better. And if you get to a point where you're like, you know what, I want to sit on the stand and I want to put that SOB away, that's some icing on the cake. But if you say, you know what, I can't, we still have a case. And we can still do the same thing without you having to do that. So it's really something I like to encourage, especially for the law enforcement and the prosecutors, but even honestly for the advocates and the people that are doing the field work on the other side of it. We all want to take these people, and truthfully, you know, I like to seem hardcore all the time, but I'm like an ultra feminist who has a heart. You know, I've got kids, I've got I had a wife or two. You know, you want to wrap your arms around them and be like, Jesus Christ, like, let me help you. But we're not in that position. So you guys are in a really unique position to really drive the recovery of these people to make them better for us. And the reality is I get to use you as a tool to make her better for me too. Because as long as I'm empowering you to do your job, then you're making my job easier because you're bringing me and the prosecutor somebody who's much more whole. So it's really a complete wraparound. I know we talk a lot about doing this without the victims, and obviously if we can do it 100% without them, I'm all for it. But if we can get them to a point where they are willing to stand forward and say, hey, look, you know what? I'm tired of this dude. Like, let's put him in prison. We need to really be doing that. So
the easiest way to work a case without victim cooperation is to get victim cooperation. But that's difficult, and that means that, you know, when I think Joe's already said this, I'm saying it a different way. But when you're going to come in and you're going to say, tell me about the hamburgers and the hot dogs. I've done everything I need to do. I hate that you have to come in and do this, but I need you to. You know, that's the best way to work it without victim cooperation, is to have them say, well, I know if this person says they need it, it's because they need it, and they're going to treat me right when they get it.
yeah, so just really quick, just investigations without the victims, again, going to this, what can we do to get around that? What do we know about victims of trafficking? We know that essentially they are a hybrid of domestic violence victims and rape victims, right? There's nothing about prostitution that's okay, and if you're being forced, frauded, or coerced into it, you're literally raped every single time. Literally raped every single time. So that's X amount of sexual assaults times X amount of domestic violence. What's the college here? Troy? I saw the sign, most beautiful campus in Alabama. I want to go check it out just so I can like confirm or deny that. But let's be real about this. If a Troy college student was out for her evening jog and some dude jumped out of the bushes, jumped on her and sexually assaulted her and sent her on her way, would the world around Dothan, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Alabama be in an uproar? People would be losing their minds, right? But this person's having that happen over and over and over and over. She's just not a college student. She's just this. So it's just something to really think about. Why do they not cooperate? Because we're really screwing them over. That's the reality of it, all the way from the bottom to the top. Advocates are doing wonderful things. In a lot of ways, we as law enforcement are messing that up. In a lot of ways, advocates are messing that up. So we all have to like literally sit at a room together. I encourage you. I know you guys obviously have meetings. Do happy hours. There is nothing better and no better place to hash out things you gotta hash than over beer. I'm 100% for real. It will open lines of communication between people because now I know you on a personal level. Now I know I get to hear about your kids. I don't really care that your kid, was first base at T-ball. It's irrelevant to me. But now we have that at least engagement going back and forth. So when we do sit together at our meeting and it's more professional, we feel like we're connected in a lot of ways. Just let our evidence and our intel and our data and all of those things lead our investigations. Let the information that we find and the intelligence that we find lead our investigation just like we would on a homicide. The Police Academy 101 on our end is, well, you don't just get a suspect in mind and build a case to the suspect, right? You build out a whole case and you're like, aha, it's him. Same thing. Let's build it all out and let the evidence show its case. And then hearsay, just again, like we talked about earlier, digital. That's definitely our way of getting around a lot of it. There's obviously way more things, and it's much more complicated than anything we can talk about, in an hour-long portion. So we need to talk about, and this kind of came up earlier, I don't think it's necessarily just for law enforcement, I think it's across the board. How do we measure success? We just did a webinar for the International Association of Chiefs of Police. I would encourage you to look at it. It's basically that, like, how are we measuring our success? It's open to anybody, you don't have to be in law enforcement. But I know how we measure it as cops, tick marks, right? We make arrests. Well, what does that do? That encourages us to make much more arrests. It's like we were talking about earlier. Who here is in a traffic unit or worked in a traffic unit? Traffic guy will roll up with a DWI, right? What's 0.08? Is that illegal here? It's 0.08. Now, let's be real. Highway patrol will run up with a 0.02, right? And be like, hey, DWI. Really? 0.02? Well, he's impaired. They're trying that hard. Well, when they're doing that, they're making these arrest tick marks that don't matter. If you walk in and I'm doing a trafficking investigation, I go, hey, who's your trafficker? I don't have one. Well, you're a prostitute. Tick, tick, tick. Our quality is garbage. So if we're taking them and we're really focusing on trafficking, our arrest statutes are going to decrease. Our arrest numbers, rather, are going to decrease. But the quality of those are going to increase. So if we have to, at the end of the month, say we have a captain come along and he's like, hey, look, last month we were putting out 20 arrests and this month we're down to 10. Who do we arrest? Do a buyer op and get them guys. Buyer ops are fish in a barrel. They're showing up like that. You'll probably make more arrests. So now the quality of your arrests has dramatically increased. Your numbers have decreased a little, but then you're offsetting it. Again, if we're looking at it from the human trafficking aspect, we're actually getting a little more quality because it may be a misdemeanor offense, but if you got buyers that are scared to buy in Dothan, I promise you they're going to drive somewhere else. It happens all the time. We monitor forums that say this, like they're like, I'm going to Dallas. So it's just more ways of cutting at these guys and getting our same numbers, but increasing the quality of them. Take a victim-centered approach. I don't like the term victim-centered when it comes to us. I do like for the advocacy workers and the NGO side and the outreach, you guys are victim-centered. Victim-centered has become a buzzword for us. To me, who do I need to be focused on? The bad guy, right? If I make you the focus of my investigation, I'm looking at the wrong damn person. But if I can be offender-focused and understand trauma and be trauma-informed, then I can turn the victims over to you and you can be victim-centered because the victim is your focus, whereas mine needs to be this guy. And then again, just going back to building out crimes using both state and federal statutes. You guys can, unless you have some state law barring it, you can file both state and federal on many, many, many offenses. I can file on you for promotion of prostitution in the state of Texas, and I can also file on you for racketeer or transportation native racketeering enterprise. We can double whammy you, and we do it all the time. So it's just something else to think about. The more that we can do to throw at these guys and gals that are doing these things, we really need to focus on those type of investigations. So just kind of moving forward on our end, I like to tell people we need to really stop and realize we're not investigating prostitution crimes. Nothing about human trafficking, it really is prostitution. It's rape. That's what it is. You can't be a consensual prostitute / trafficking victim. You can be a consensual prostitute if that's what you want to be. I'll argue that all day, but that's a whole nother story. Or you're a trafficking victim. And these victims are sexual assault victims. They're not. Does that make sense? They are literally sexual assault victims. So that's just something that we really need to take a stance at. And then we also have to realize cooperation does not mean that that is the only way in which you were a victim. You don't have to cooperate with anything to still be a victim. I can't tell you how many we've had that are like really calling us every name in the book, and tell them, hey, there's the door, there's the exit sign, have a good day. Doesn't mean you're not a victim. Doesn't mean that nothing else has changed, and I'm still going to get him, and I'm still going to deal with him according. So it's just something to think about, that do domestic violence victims in the state of Oklahoma, or God, Jesus Christ, where I think I'm at, Alabama, does everybody in the state of Alabama that's a victim of domestic violence cooperate? No, of course not. So it's just something to consider, that just because they don't cooperate, we don't arrest them. We don't do it for their own good. We really need to take that same stance. So, did you want to lead on this part?
Yeah, I mean, this is really short. We've kind of talked on it, and it would honestly benefit us if now that we've gone through the day and we've come to an understanding, like what are coalition roles,